In a boost to Ukraine, its troops have punched through the first line of Russia's defenses in the southern region of Zaporizhzhia. But will the next steps be even harder and more costly? My guest this week is Yuriy Sak, advisor to Ukraine's Ministry of Defense, and he's clear what his country will give for peace and what it won't.
Giving territorial concessions to an aggressor is a dead end. It's a non-starter.
Despite the good news on the battlefield, there's a political casualty in Ukraine. Defense Minister Oleksii Reznikov, who spearheaded the country's push for Western weapons and ammunition. What did he do wrong? Other senior politicians in Ukraine are now openly critical of their Western partners. How serious is the rift? And human rights violations on the field of battle. UN monitors say it's not just the Russians shooting unarmed prisoners. So does Ukraine have a serious case to answer? Yuriy Sak, welcome to Conflict Zone.
Good afternoon, Tim.
Latest reports indicate your counteroffensive in the south of the country is making progress. A number of towns have been liberated. The first line of Russian defenses has been breached in the Zaporizhzhia region. The White House called that notable progress. Is it?
It is indeed. We have been conducting shaping and probing operations for quite some time now. And considering the density of mining, considering the strength of the concrete fortifications of the enemy, considering the lack of air power that Ukraine still experiences, this can and should be seen as considerable progress. And we hope to develop it and continue to liberate our lands and cities, not just in the south, but in other parts of the front line as well, which stretches, as you remember, for over 900 kilometers.
It's been a while since you've had some important successes on the battlefield. So why did the president choose this moment to sack your defense minister, Oleksii Reznikov, when things are actually getting better than they have been?
We act in this war, in this defensive war against a very brutal and aggressive enemy as a team. And the captain of our team is our president, Mr. Zelenskyy. So as a captain, he's best positioned to see the full picture, to know that at this stage, this move, this change or reshuffle, he believes his vision is that it will improve our capabilities and make us stronger. So as he said, the president, as he said in his televised address, in his vision, the time has come for trying new approaches to the way the Minister of Defense interacts and cooperates with both the military and the civil society. So we trust our captain. We are driven by the same goal, to defeat the enemy, and we are moving forward.
As you say, the president talked about new approaches, like what, for instance?
Like, for example, there were a lot of transparency procurement procedures that the reform of which was started by Mr. Oleksii Reznikov, and it needs to be accelerated. Like of course, the primary objectives of the new Minister of Defense, Mr. Rustem Umerov, they will continue to be ensuring that Ukraine receives sufficient weapons and Ukraine is capable of driving the enemy out. But of course, there are, certain processes within the Ministry of Defense which have created certain public resonance in the recent couple of months, and they have to be addressed. And we believe this is what the role of the new Minister of Defense will be.
I understand that, but what's extraordinary about Reznikov's forced departure is that he's the man who's negotiated the acquisition of vast amounts of foreign weaponry and ammunition. He's built up a huge list of personal contacts with senior Western counterparts and some considerable amount of goodwill. Don't you now risk squandering that goodwill and the personal relationships that Mr. Reznikov has built up to the advantage of your country?
Well, indeed, for the more than last 550 days, Mr. Reznikov was driven by the goal of building these relationships, and he actually made impossible possible on so many different occasions. It all began with the United States of America telling him back in October 2021 that it was not possible for Ukraine to receive even Stingers and Javelins. And look, right now, we are expecting to receive modern fighter jets, F-16. So Mr. Reznikov's contribution to making our partners believe in our victory, making our partners believe that we can be trusted and that we should be given these weapon systems, modern weapon systems, his contribution was invaluable. Of course, Mr. Rustem Umerov is also a very experienced politician. He's very well connected on the international scene, and I am sure that he will be able to pick up this flag and be the flag bearer for the next stages of this war and of the development of the Minister of Defense.
You mentioned a moment ago some of the next stages in the war that you'll be facing, and a front line that stretches to around 1,000 kilometers. Nobody doubts your will to get there, but do you have the military hardware to fight and win across these huge distances?
Tim, as you know, this is a battle of David against Goliath. So in this war, we have to fight against an enemy which outnumbers us in every possible respect, right? In terms of artillery, in terms of the amount of manpower that they have. So this is why we're fighting a smart war. This is why we are very careful. We'd rather progress slower, but we are saving the lives of our soldiers. We are very careful with the equipment that we have, the equipment that we have received from our Western partners. So, considering that we will continue to fight a smart war, I think, and providing that the support of our Western partners will continue, I think we are on track and, we will definitely win.
I want to talk about that support a little later on, but you talked just a moment ago about saving the lives of your soldiers. By all accounts, you don't publish casualty figures. Why should you? But by all accounts, you have taken terrible losses in the battle so far. How shocking has that been for you?
Tim, this is a war, and of course, this is a war which is the largest by scale from the Second World War. Our losses, for us, the loss of every soldier is a tragedy. But we have said it many times that because we are fighting a smart war and because we have high regard for the lives of our soldiers, we are not using them as cannon fodder. We are not throwing them into these meat grinder attacks. This is why our losses are considerably lower than those of the enemy. Just so that you understand, from August 28 till September 3, according to our figures, we have destroyed more than 4,000 Russian soldiers. Now, that is very, very huge. And we do take losses, but like we said, it's always, sometimes it's a ratio of 5-1, sometimes 9-1. So we are very careful and we are, very considerate when it comes to planning our military operations.
American officials say you've started to shift more experienced forces from the east to the south, but these units have also taken heavy casualties, haven't they? One report said some platoons are mostly staffed by people who've already been wounded but have come back to fight on the front lines again. Is that right?
We are making sure that our armed forces are well equipped and well staffed. We have sufficient reserves. Our military commanders are traveling along the front line and having a real feel of what the situation is on the battlefield. Our president himself personally just yesterday went both to Donetsk region and to Zaporizhzhia. So we are in control, and some of these reports are taken out of context. And the situation, of course, it's difficult. It's, some of the areas of the front line, like, for example, the Kupyansk, the Lyman direction, they are very fierce fighting. In Bakhmut, for example, as well, right? But at the same time, like I said, some of these reports are taken out of context and they don't portray the picture the way it is.
You mentioned the minefields that you've encountered on the battlefield. Your foreign minister called the number of Russian mines, unprecedented. One US general spoke of 5 or 6 mines per square meter. Did that take you by surprise? That's extraordinary density, isn't it?
It is extraordinary density. And moreover, because of this density and because of the way in which Russians are laying those mines, have been laying those mines, Now, it is often not even possible to use the demining equipment. So a lot of the...
But you don't have enough of it anyway, do you? You don't have enough. You have about 25% of the equipment that you need, according to some reports.
Well, yes, we're always asking for more because, it's a long and very extensive stretch of minefields. But I was just trying to say that even, where we do have the demining equipment, very often it still has to be done manually. And like the latest reports we had from the front lines is that, for example, Russians are now setting these minefields on fire to make it even more difficult for us to carry out demining operations. So it's hard going.
The ground that you're going to have to cover in the Zaporizhzhia region, this is flat ground now, isn't it, which favors the defenders. Also, winter is on the horizon, and that too will favor the Russians dug into their trenches and fortifications. You have an enormous struggle ahead of you, don't you? This is just the beginning, isn't it?
And we know about this, and we are determined, and we are preparing for it. Now, what you have to understand, of course, is that we are paying a lot of attention to disrupting the logistics lines of our enemy so that they are not actually able to prepare for the winter season. And what we're seeing that, we are succeeding in destroying their ammunition depots. We have destroyed the bridges that they have been using for logistical supplies in the south.
Last month, you landed a raiding party on Crimea. A brief report from your ministry said all the objectives of this special operation were achieved without casualties, and you exchanged fire with Russian forces. What were the objectives here?
Well, the objectives are to keep the enemy off balance, of course, always, and to continue our liberation campaign. Crimea is part of the internationally recognized territory of Ukraine, and our vision of the peace plan envisages that, of course, Crimea is back to where it belongs, to Ukraine. So we are carrying out different operations. We are showing the enemy that, we are capable of reaching them wherever they are on the temporarily occupied territories, and it will continue until we win.
Mr. Sak, whatever the hardships your people have been enduring, the government appears to enjoy pretty strong, solid support at home for its policies. One of your president's advisors put it this week at about 95%. But when it comes to people's attitudes in Europe and America, the picture is less encouraging. Are you worried about that?
Well, of course, almost every Ukrainian now has been touched in a bad way by this war. This is why, if you ask Ukrainian people, the vast majority is very determined to continue the fight until we win, because we all understand that this is about our survival. We understand that we have no other choice.
But getting that idea to the public in America and Europe, for instance, that's the problem, isn't it?
We are trying to explain in very simple terms that Ukraine's victory in this war is not just in the interest of Ukraine, it's in the national interest of all other countries in Western Europe, in the United States of America, because we're seeing on a daily basis, like, look, yesterday, a couple of drones fell and detonated on the territory of Romania. We have photos, evidence of this, right? And this is already NATO territory. So, and you have heard again that the leader of Kremlin has refused to continue the grain deal. So the longer this war continues, we are all affected. Our national interest, Ukraine's, Western European countries, the United States, everybody is affected. So this is why it is, I think, not right to think for some of the allies that, you could lose interest. It's a war that affects everyone. This is why we have to...
You say that, but it's a reality that you have to factor in, don't you? I mean, do you not fear that a Trump victory could bring your war-fighting capabilities to a grinding halt if he's elected president next year?
Well, Tim, we have to, and we do understand that elections are very complex processes and they involve a lot of different rhetoric. But we speak to both Republicans and Democrats almost on a daily basis. And, election rhetoric aside, we are pretty much confident that the bipartisan support of Ukraine will continue, because I will repeat, defeating Russia and bringing Russia to justice is in the interest of the international community, is in the interest of the United States of America as well. So let's wait and see what the elections will bring. Of course, America is a free country, and may the best candidate win. But the bipartisan support, we hope, will continue.
There's a strong impression, Mr. Sak, that tensions have been increasing between Ukraine and some of its allies. Last month, presidential advisor Sergei Leshchenko was quoted as saying, "It's upsetting and demotivating that Western military equipment has not yet arrived in the promised quantities." Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba, for instance, hit back at Western commentators and people who said your counteroffensive has been too slow. He said, "I would recommend all critics to shut up, come to Ukraine and try to liberate 1 square centimetre by themselves." Do you think these outbursts do any good for you or anybody else? Apart from Russia, of course.
Yeah, well, of course, we are facing a very difficult task. On the one hand, we have to be diplomatic and calm and patient. On the other hand, every day we get the news of our close friends being killed on the front lines. We get the news of Ukrainian cities being destroyed. So it is probably possible to understand why sometimes, you just lose your nerve and you just have this outburst of emotions. Now, I would like to stress that we are extremely grateful to all our Western partners who continue to provide Ukraine with the vital military support. And these statements, they should not be seen as Ukrainians being ungrateful or impatient. I will repeat, we are very grateful to all our partners for the support. But sometimes, when it feels like a lot more can be done and a lot more lives can be saved if certain things are streamlined. Now, of course, we say that. And when it comes to the pace of the counteroffensive, we have said it many times that none of our allies would have even started these offensive operations, for example, considering the lack of air power, because in the past, no NATO country or NATO as an alliance has never had a campaign where they would go into military operations of this magnitude without air superiority. Now, we are doing this because we have no other choice. We're waiting for the F-16s, but at the same time, we have to continue fighting. So considering all the factors, this counteroffensive or offensive is very dynamic, and it is achieving progress, and we are moving forward. We're not standing in the same place.
Mr. Sak, isn't one of the underlying problems that leads to tension between Ukraine and its allies the fact that you don't necessarily share the same strategic goals in this war? You know what you want. You want to liberate your country from Russian invaders. You insist your land will not be traded for peace, full stop. Do you even know what kind of outcome the West would want, or perhaps more accurately, what kind of outcome it would settle for? Do you even know that?
Well, it seems to us logical that the Western countries, and not just the Western countries for that matter, all civilized nations are interested in restoring the rules-based international order. This is what it's primarily all about our shared values. So when we speak to our partners, to the leadership of Western countries, we see a very good understanding of the fact that this is not just about Ukraine. This is not a local remote war which Ukraine is fighting against Russia for some obscure territories. This is something that can spill over the western borders of Ukraine into Western Europe. Now, this is why, if you ask countries like Poland or the Baltic states, they are all very well aware of the real risks. And they are very, very supportive of Ukraine, and they, support Ukraine's NATO membership bid and increasing military support to Ukraine. So I think we are binded by same values and by the same goals. We want to live in a world in which one paper tiger superpower is not in a position to blackmail on a daily basis the international community and wreak havoc. One country should not be allowed to weaponize hunger, to block
I suppose the question is, how do you get from the battlefield to the negotiating table? You have President Biden saying this war will end at the negotiating table. How do you get from the battlefield to that table? What's your strategic plan for that? You have to outright victory? Is that the only way you're going to sit down and talk?
We will continue to liberate our lands. We will continue to drive the enemy out. We will continue to destroy their equipment, their life force, to the point at which they will understand that there is no point for them in further fighting. Like this was the case, for example, in Kharkiv, in Kherson, when we liberated them. So to be at the negotiating table, we need to understand that Ukraine has to be in a position to restore its territorial sovereignty the way it was in 1991. Now,
so complete sovereignty. That's your precondition for sitting down at the table.
Absolutely. There will be
and if the
no
West doesn't
concessions
share
about
that view, if the West doesn't share that view and countries have voiced different opinions about, isn't it time for talks to begin and shouldn't we have a ceasefire and issues like that, you've batted all that away. Are you going to continue to bat it away?
Tim, I wouldn't want to speculate, but for now, at least on the official level, we have not seen any disagreement with the Ukrainian vision of the peace plan, with Mr. Zelenskyy vision of the peace plan. And that peace plan supposes the complete liberation of Ukrainian territories. So we will continue on that path because, we have tried appeasing the aggressor in the past. Look, in 2014, Russia has illegally annexed Crimea. There was no response from the international community. There was no military response from Ukraine. And this is where it led us, right? This is where we are now. In 2023, thousands of people dead, whole cities destroyed. So we know that this is like a dead end, right? Giving territorial concessions to an aggressor is a dead end. It's a non-starter.
Okay, so but where there have been disagreements between you and your allies is over membership of both NATO and the EU. Both organizations insist you will get that membership, but neither will tell you when. In NATO's formulation, it'll be when allies agree and conditions are met. Do you even know what that means?
Well, after the Vilnius NATO summit a couple of months back, I think every participant of that NATO summit gave a press conference during which it was very clearly stated that Ukraine will become a member of NATO after Ukraine wins the war. This is why all the Western countries now are supporting Ukraine with a view to defeating Russia on the battlefield, resolving this issue, and then Ukraine becomes a member of NATO, because this is the only plausible security guarantee that we can get. And in the meantime, we're working on bilateral security guarantees with those countries who are both at NATO summit and the G7 guarantees. So,
but that's a work in progress, isn't it? That's a work in progress. Your president was initially very dissatisfied with what came out of Vilnius. He called the NATO offer absurd. He walked that back later, but the president is still angry, isn't he? Still angry. He didn't get what he came for.
I think the president is very sincere when he says that the NATO summit in Vilnius was a historic summit, because Ukraine has never received in the past progress of that kind.
After he called it absurd. He said that after he'd called it absurd. His first reaction was, this is absurd.
Well, yes, but after he called it absurd, there was a round of bilateral negotiations. There were talks during the NATO summit. So when he actually received information about what NATO was at that time offering to Ukraine and the assurance that we were getting, it became clear, because it was work in progress then, and it is work in progress now.
You talked earlier about the issue of human rights, and in the little time we have left, I'd like to sort of mention the fact that while attention has focused on egregious violations reportedly carried out by Russian troops, in March, the UN Human Rights Monitoring Mission also accused Ukraine of war crimes. This was a report which said both sides in the conflict had carried out extrajudicial executions on military personnel. Your government promised to investigate these accusations. Has it done so? And if so, what are the results?
We are investigating all possible violations of Geneva Conventions of human rights, international treaties. There is whole departments within the Ministry of Justice who are dealing within the Office of the General Prosecutor. And I think when they will be investigated to completely, the results will be informed. But I would like to stress that some of the reports from the international organizations that have been made public have been very, very dubious when it comes to the evidential base, when it comes to the way, the methodology that they've used. They were very lopsided, and I don't think they were 100% trustworthy.
Well, you say you're investigating, but almost 6 months have passed. Isn't it time that these incredibly serious accusations were dealt with and that the results were made public?
Well, this is not, I must confess, my specific area of expertise and responsibilities, but I'm sure that, we honor our international commitments and work is being done. We are both collecting evidence and investigating the war crimes committed by the aggressors, by the terrorist state Russia. And, we have no double standards. If there are violations of Geneva Conventions and human rights laws by our side, we will investigate them and report about it.
All right, Yuriy Sak, it's been good to have you on Conflict Zone. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you very much.